Imagine a world of silk gowns, glittering chandeliers, and the suffocating illusion of moral perfection. That was the postcard image of Victorian high society. But behind the gilded drawing room doors of Mayfair, a far darker reality festered. Wealthy wives weren't living a fairy tale. They were decorative prisoners, trapped in a gilded cage built by their own husbands. What began as a life of privilege quietly spiraled into an epidemic of isolation, secret opium addictions, and the most fashionable diagnosis of the era: female hysteria. This is what life was really like for the filthy rich in Victorian England, and it was anything but a dream. But to truly understand how the wealthiest women in history became some of the most miserable, we need to step into the gaslit streets of 19th century London, where the newly rich industrialists were building palaces that rivaled royalty. Picture the grand townhouses of Mayfair, the daily promenades in Hyde Park, the crystal chandeliers, the rustle of silk and whalebone. This was the era when a woman's worth was measured entirely by her husband's bank balance, and her ability to host a dinner party without a single fork out of place. And from the outside, it looked like perfection. But here is the thing. For the women trapped inside this glittering machine, the reality was a slow, suffocating prison sentence. By the 1840s, a wealthy wife had become the ultimate status symbol, an exquisite living doll who proved a man could afford to keep a human being in complete, useless luxury. And that was the trap. The more money he had, the more isolated she became, stripped of purpose, legally erased the moment she said, "I do." She couldn't own property, couldn't sue, couldn't even keep her own children if she dared leave. Her only job was to look beautiful and obey. So they sat in their gilded drawing rooms, dressed in millions of dollars worth of silk today, and quietly went mad from loneliness. The cure, prescribed by every fashionable doctor, was opium disguised as a lady's nerve tonic, tucked right next to the smelling salts. And the diagnosis that covered everything from rage to sadness, hysteria. It was an epidemic of despair hiding in plain sight. So, what did a single day actually feel like inside this sparkling cage? We're about to follow one aristocratic wife from sunrise to the dead of night, through the rituals, the medicine cabinets, and the secrets nobody was ever supposed to overhear. This is the history class you never got, and once you see it, you will never look at a period drama the same way again. Now, let's set the scene. You've just woken up in 1863, in a 4-poster bed draped with heavy velvet curtains, inside a Mayfair townhouse that cost your husband more than most people earn in a lifetime. The sheets are Irish linen, the pillows are goose down, and the air smells of coal smoke and rosewater. But don't get too comfortable. The day ahead will make you grateful for every bit of freedom you've ever had. And you are about to discover that being rich in Victorian England was, for a woman, a very luxurious way to disappear. Your maid wakes you at 7 with a cup of weak tea and a face carefully blank of any emotion except obedience. She's been up since 5, scrubbing grates and blacking the range. But she'll never complain in your presence. That's the first rule of this house. Silence is the sound of perfection. You, meanwhile, are still exhausted. You went to bed at midnight after a dinner party that lasted 4 hours, and you dreamed of nothing but corsets and judgment. But there's no time to linger. Your day is already mapped out in quarter-hour increments, dictated by an etiquette manual so thick it could double as a doorstop. So you rise, and the performance begins. The first ordeal is dressing. You don't just put on clothes in Victorian high society. You are assembled, layer by punishing layer, by a lady's maid who knows your body better than you do. First comes the chemise and drawers, then the stockings, then the corset. Ah, the corset. It's made of whalebone and steel busk, and it's tightened with the kind of force usually reserved for rigging a ship. You grip the bedpost while your maid plants a knee in the small of your back and pulls the laces until you can barely inhale. The goal is a 15-inch waist, and you are proud of yours. Even if it means you can't bend over, eat a full meal, or laugh too hard. This is the price of beauty. And you pay it every single morning without a second thought. But the corset is just the beginning. Over it goes the crinoline, a colossal bell-shaped cage of steel hoops that swings wildly when you walk and makes it physically impossible to pass through a normal doorway without turning sideways. You'll wear 7 pounds of fabric and metal before breakfast, and when you finally sit down, you'll have to perch on the edge of your chair like a nervous bird, because the crinoline tilts if you lean back, and the whole room will see your petticoats. And this is only your first outfit of the day. Depending on the hour, you'll change into a morning dress for receiving calls, a walking dress for the promenade, a carriage dress for afternoon visits, a tea gown for the drawing room, and finally an evening gown for dinner. 6 wardrobe changes, each more elaborate and restricting than the last. The fashion plate you see in museums doesn't show the bruises on your ribcage or the way your back aches by noon. But those bruises are as much a part of this life as the silk. At 8:30, you descend the main staircase for breakfast, your hand barely grazing the polished mahogany banister because you've been trained to glide, not clomp. The dining room is vast and freezing, despite the fire the servants lit at dawn. Your husband is already there, hidden behind a newspaper, and he doesn't look up when you enter. This is normal. A Victorian husband and wife might share a house, a name, and a bed, but they very rarely share a genuine conversation over eggs. He'll acknowledge you with a slight nod, perhaps a comment about the weather or the Prime Minister, and then he'll retreat to his study or his club. Your relationship is a business arrangement dressed up in wedding rings, and the business is children, property, and appearances. Love, in the modern sense, is a luxury neither of you can afford. Your breakfast is a silent, bland affair. Toast, porridge, weak coffee. You wouldn't dream of eating a hearty meal, because appetite in a woman was considered vaguely indecent, a sign of animal nature that must be suppressed. So you nibble like a sparrow while your stomach growls, and you stare at the heavy silver service and the portraits of ancestors who probably never smiled. The house around you is staffed by an army. A cook, a housekeeper, a butler, 3 housemaids, a kitchen maid, a lady's maid, and a footman. That's 9 people to serve a family of 2, sometimes 3, if a child is home from the nursery. In a wealthy Victorian household, servants outnumber family members 5 to 1, and their footsteps are so quiet you sometimes feel like you are floating through a ghost ship. But their presence means you never have to lift a finger. And that, strangely, is the problem. Because after breakfast, the vast emptiness of your day yawns open. You have no job, no career, no education beyond watercolors and French verbs, and no legal right to own property, sign a contract, or even keep your own wages if you ever earned any. The moment you married, under the legal doctrine of coverture, your entire legal existence was absorbed into your husband's. You are not a person in the eyes of the law. You are a dependent, like a child or a lamp. So you drift from room to room, trailing your crinoline across the Turkish carpets, while the servants do all the actual work. Your only official duty is to manage the household, which really means telling the housekeeper what to order for dinner and then pretending you are busy. Some days you write a few letters, or do a little embroidery, or practice the piano piece you've played the same way for 10 years. Other days you just sit by the window, watching other people's lives pass by, wondering if this is all there is. But here is the thing society never told you. The richer your husband, the smaller your world becomes. In a middle-class home, a wife might cook, clean, tend the children, even help with the family business. She's exhausted. Yes, but she's necessary. In the upper class, you are ornamental. Any attempt to do something useful is met with horror. A wealthy woman who folds her own laundry is like a racehorse pulling a plow, a waste of expensive breeding. So you are caged in silk and told to be grateful. And this idleness is the first crack through which a darker tide begins to seep. Around 11 o'clock, the morning calls begin. This is the central ritual of your social existence, a relentless round of 15-minute visits to other ladies in other drawing rooms, all of you trapped in identical cages, sipping tea and dissecting reputations with surgical precision. You hand your engraved card to the footman, who delivers it on a silver tray. And if the lady of the house is receiving, you are ushered into a room that looks almost exactly like your own. The conversation is a minefield of unspoken rules. You must never discuss money, politics, religion, or anything that might cause genuine feeling. Instead, you talk about the weather, upcoming balls, and who was seen riding in Hyde Park with someone they shouldn't have been seen with. Gossip is the only currency you are allowed to trade, and you learn to wield it like a weapon. But even here, you are being watched. Every smile is analyzed, every new dress noted and priced, every absence interpreted as scandal. If you leave a calling card with a folded corner, it means you've come in person, and the recipient must return the call within a week, or a social war will silently ignite. If you fail to call on a woman of higher rank, you'll be cut from guest lists and whispered about as fast or unsteady. The pressure is immense, because in a world where you have no money of your own and no legal rights, your social standing is your only armor. Lose it, and you lose everything. So you perform, day after day, a script written by a society that values you only as an accessory to a man. And the effort is exhausting. By early afternoon, you are back in your carriage, rattling over cobblestones toward Hyde Park for the daily promenade. This is the hour when all of fashionable London turns out to see and be seen. Your carriage moves at a crawl, part of a glittering procession of polished wood, matched horses and ladies in plumed hats. You smile and wave at acquaintances, and your husband, if he's with you, tips his top hat to men who might be useful to his business. It looks like a painting come to life, and it is, but it's also a job. You are on display, and the stakes are high. If your dress is last season, they'll notice. If your carriage is rented, they'll know. The whole thing is a theater of wealth, and you are the leading lady who never gets to leave the stage. But what no one sees, as you nod graciously from your velvet seat, is the small bottle hidden in your reticule. It's a nerve tonic, prescribed by your doctor for what he calls feminine nervousness. You've been taking it for months now, and it does calm you. The label says it's a mixture of alcohol and opium, perfectly legal, perfectly ladylike. You are not an addict, of course. Addicts are dirty men in opium dens. You are just a delicate woman with a delicate constitution, and this is medicine. The fact that you can't get through a day without it is nobody's business, and you are not alone. In the 1860s, laudanum and morphine are found in nearly every middle and upper-class home. The aspirin of the 19th century, handed out for everything from toothaches to heartbreak. Doctors prescribe it with a generous hand, especially to women, whose emotions are seen as a kind of illness that needs chemical quieting. And so, in your silk and whalebone, you are quietly slipping into dependency, and no one is going to stop you. Not the doctor, who's paid to keep you docile. Not your husband, who prefers a serene wife. And certainly not society, which depends on women like you to stay beautiful, silent, and still. But now, the day is darkening, and a new kind of trial is approaching. As your carriage turns back toward home, you feel the familiar dread settling in your stomach. Tonight, you are hosting a dinner party for 18. The cook has been planning for days. The servants are polishing silver until it gleams like fire, and you will be expected to preside over a table sparkling with crystal and conversation. A 4-hour marathon of 18 courses, each paired with a different wine, all while wearing a dress so heavy you can barely stand. And this dinner party will be the event where everything you've been hiding, the loneliness, the anxiety, the little bottle in your bag, will be tested to the breaking point. Because among the guests tonight is a doctor who once examined you, and a rival who knows more than she should. The chandeliers are lit, the first carriage is pulling up, and your husband is waiting at the foot of the stairs, his eyes already scanning you for imperfections. The gilded cage is sparkling its brightest, and you are about to find out just how sharp its bars really are. The first carriage door swings open, and Lady Catherine Ashworth descends onto the rain-slicked flagstones like a cat arriving at a mouse. Convention. She's wrapped in burgundy silk and diamonds that catch the gaslight, and her smile contains more hidden weapons than a dueling pistol. You watch from the doorway, your own smile pinned in place, as your footman guides her inside. She's the rival who knows too much. And tonight, she's seated directly to your right at the table. The evening has just begun, and you can already feel the trap tightening around your whalebone-cased ribs. Inside, the reception hall has been transformed. The chandelier glitters with 100 candles, their flames reflected endlessly in the gilded mirrors that line the walls. The air is thick with the scent of hothouse lilies, beeswax, and the faint metallic tang of anxiety that only you seem to notice. Servants glide through the crowd like silent extras in a play, their faces expressionless, their hands bearing silver trays of champagne coupes. The guests are assembling, 18 people, each one a potential judge, each one a keeper of reputations. The women are swathed in taffeta and moiré, their corsets creaking faintly when they curtsy. The men are monochromatic in black tailcoats, their side whiskers bristling, their conversation already circling toward politics and profit. And you, the hostess, are the axis around which this entire glittering machine must revolve without a single squeak. Your evening gown is an emerald green silk velvet, the color of money and envy, cut so low across the shoulders that you can feel the draft from every door. The bodice is boned with whalebone that digs into your hip bones when you sit. The skirt is enormous, a cascade of ruffles and flounces supported by a crinoline so wide you must turn sideways to pass between the chairs. You had a maid lace your corset to 18 inches tonight, because Lady Catherine was rumored to have achieved 17, and you will not be outgored. So you are now breathing with only the top third of your lungs, and your stomach is a hollow, acid pit, but you smile. That's the first and most essential rule of Victorian dinner parties. Smile until your face aches, and never let them see the cracks. The dinner gong sounds at exactly 8 o'clock, a deep bronze note that vibrates through the soles of your slippers. The double doors to the dining room swing open, and the procession begins. You walk in on your husband's arm, your crinoline swaying like a ship at anchor, your hand resting so lightly on his sleeve that it might be a moth. He is impeccable tonight, his mustache waxed to points, his collar starched to a stiffness that forbids spontaneous head movements. He leans down and murmurs, "Do try not to fidget tonight, my dear." The Ashworths are watching, not a question, not a reassurance, an instruction. And then he pulls out your chair at the head of the table and you sink into it, the cage of your skirt collapsing slightly around you. The table itself is a monument to excess. The white damask cloth is embroidered with your husband's crest, and it's laid with so much silverware that it looks like a cutlery convention. There are oyster forks, soup spoons, fish knives, entree forks, Juan knives, game shears, fruit picks, and a bewildering array of crystal glasses for champagne, sherry, hock, claret, port, and Madeira. The centerpiece is an elaborate epergne of silver and mirrored plate, piled high with grapes, pomegranates, and hothouse peaches that cost more than one of your housemaid's entire annual wages. The candlelight is so brilliant that the whole room seems to float in a golden haze, and for a moment it really does look like paradise. But then you notice Lady Catherine, already seated and already watching you with those pale, unblinking eyes, and the illusion shatters. Dinner begins with the soup course, a clear turtle consommé served in shallow bowls so delicate you can see your own shadow through the porcelain. You lift your spoon with the correct motion from the side of the bowl, never the center, and you sip as quietly as a cat. But the corset is cutting into your stomach, and after 3 spoonfuls, you feel a wave of nausea. You set the spoon down, and Lady Catherine notices. "Is the soup not to your liking?" she asks, her voice like cream laced with arsenic. "I find consommé à la reine so much more digestible. But of course, every household has its standards. The insult is tiny, a needle prick, but it leaves a drop of blood in the water." You murmur something about a delicate appetite, and the footman whisks the bowl away. 12 more courses to go. Now the fish course arrives. Salmon in lobster sauce, garnished with shrimp and watercress. The scent is rich, buttery, overwhelming. Your husband is already deep in conversation with the gentleman on his left, something about the Suez Canal, and shares in Egyptian cotton. You are supposed to be talking to the gentleman on your right, an elderly baron with ear hair like hedge trimmings, but your attention keeps drifting to Lady Catherine, who is now telling a story about a mutual acquaintance. "She's gone to the country for her health," Lady Catherine says, her voice pitched just loud enough to reach you. "A complete nervous collapse, I am told. The doctors were called in, and they recommended a rest cure. No visitors, no letters, no books. They say she screamed for 3 days when they took her away. But her husband was insistent. She's so much calmer now, poor lamb." A pause. "Or so they say." You feel the blood drain from your face. You know exactly who she's talking about. It was a woman from your own calling circle. A young wife named Eleanor who once confessed to you, in the privacy of a garden bench, that she sometimes felt like she was drowning inside her own house. You told no one. But someone found out anyway, and now Eleanor is in a private asylum in the countryside, her husband having signed the committal papers with the same ease he might endorse a check. The madhouse for the inconvenient wife. It happens all the time, and everyone pretends it doesn't. But Lady Catherine is looking at you like she's just handed you a gift. And you know with sickening certainty that she's daring you to crack. You signal the footman for more champagne, even though you know you shouldn't. The alcohol will mix with the laudanum you already took before the first guest arrived. The dose you poured into your palm from the little blue bottle hidden inside your reticule. You'd needed it just to get down the stairs tonight. Your nerves so frayed that your maid had to retie your sash twice because your hands were shaking. It was a larger dose than usual, but you told yourself it was necessary. Now, as the champagne bubbles hit your empty stomach, the world begins to tilt very slightly to the left. You grip the edge of the table and stare at the épergne until the pomegranates stop. Vibrating, the roast course is wheeled in on a silver trolley, a baron of beef so large it requires 2 men to carve it, plus a saddle of mutton, a haunch of venison, and 3 kinds of poultry. The table is suddenly a battlefield of meat, and the men attack it with relish while the women take delicate portions of the white meat and push the rest around their plates. You manage a slice of capon, but when you try to chew, your jaw feels like it's filled with cotton. The laudanum is kicking in now, smoothing the sharp edges of the room into a soft, golden blur. You feel almost calm, almost floaty, and you realize with a detached sort of horror that you are losing your grip on the situation. But you can't stop now. The dinner must continue. The pudding course is a masterpiece, a towering Savoy cake dripping with sponge sugar, surrounded by custards, jellies, and a Bombay glacé molded into the shape of a swan. When the footman sets it before you, the guests applaud politely, and you are supposed to smile and serve the first slice to the lady of highest rank. But your hand is no longer entirely under your command. The silver serving knife feels like a foreign object. You manage to slice into the cake, and a single spun sugar rose topples from the top and shatters on the tablecloth. The tinkling sound of breaking sugar is so small, but in that moment, it's as loud as a gunshot. "Oh dear," Lady Catherine murmurs. "The poor swan has lost its head." A few guests titter. Your husband's eyes flick toward you with the cold precision of a man calculating the cost of embarrassment, and you force a laugh that sounds, even to your own ears, like a door creaking. By the time the ladies retire to the drawing room, leaving the men to their port and cigars, you are functioning on pure instinct. The drawing room is lit with softer lamps, the curtains drawn against the night, and the women arrange themselves on the settees and chaises like a flock of exotic, corseted birds. The conversation, freed from male ears, becomes surgical. They're discussing the latest divorce case, a scandalous affair that made the newspapers, and the consensus is unanimous. The wife was at fault, of course. She was fast, immoral, likely hysterical. The husband was long-suffering. You listen, and you nod, and inside you are screaming, because you know that every single woman in this room is one misstep away from the same fate. They know it too. That's why they police each other so viciously. The cruelty is a form of self-preservation. But Lady Catherine has not finished with you. She drifts over to your settee as if drawn by an invisible current and settles beside you, her crinoline pressing against yours like two warring ships. "I had the pleasure of consulting Dr. Ashford last week," she says, her voice low and confidential. "Just a trifling feminine complaint, nothing serious. He mentioned that you've been under his care as well. For a nervous disorder, I believe." She tilts her head, her expression one of perfect, poisonously sweet concern. "You must tell me what tonic he prescribes. You always look so serene." The word drips with insinuation. Serene, doped, same thing in her lexicon. You open your mouth to reply, and nothing comes out, because the truth is that Dr. Ashford has been prescribing you increasing doses of laudanum for over a year. It started after your last miscarriage, when you couldn't stop crying, couldn't get out of bed, couldn't perform the endless social duties required of a wife. He called it melancholia, a nervous exhaustion of the female system, and he prescribed a solution that came in a brown glass bottle, labeled only with a number. Take a teaspoon in water 3 times a day, more if required. It worked like a miracle. The tears stopped, the social mask clicked back into place, and your husband was pleased. But the teaspoon became a tablespoon, and the 3 times a day became whenever the walls started closing in. Now you can't face a morning without it. Without it, you shake. Without it, you see things that aren't there. You are an addict, and Lady Catherine knows. I am sure I don't know what you mean. You manage, your voice coming from somewhere very far away. Dr. Ashford is an excellent physician. His treatments are quite standard, and that's true. They are standard. That's the horror. Thousands of women like you are taking the exact same tonic. The medical establishment has turned half the upper class into opium users, and nobody is sounding an alarm because the women are quiet, and a quiet woman is a good woman. Lady Catherine smiles, and her smile says she knows she's won this round. "Of course," she says. "Do give my regards to the dear doctor. I am sure he'll be checking on you soon." The men return from the dining room, and the evening limps toward its conclusion. Music is proposed. One of the younger ladies is coaxed to the pianoforte, and she plays a Mendelssohn piece with more enthusiasm than accuracy. You sit on a hard-backed chair near the window, your back ramrod straight, your vision swimming. When the last guest finally departs, when the front door closes behind Lady Catherine's burgundy train, you are left standing in the hallway with your husband, and the silence is heavier than the entire dinner had been. He doesn't shout. He never shouts. He simply says, "You embarrassed me tonight. I'll send for Dr. Ashford in the morning." And then he walks upstairs, leaving you alone with the dying candles and the taste of spun sugar gone sour in your mouth. You don't sleep that night. Your maid unlaces you in silence, her practiced fingers working the corset strings, until you can finally draw a full breath. The relief is so sharp, it's almost painful. Your ribs ache in a wide band where the whalebone has imprinted your skin, and there are bruises on your hips where the cage of the crinoline rubbed against you. For 6 hours, but the physical pain is nothing compared to the dread. Dr. Ashford is coming, and Dr. Ashford, you know, has strong opinions about women who embarrass their husbands in public. The next morning, the rain is lashing against the windows, and Dr. Ashford arrives at 10 o'clock sharp. He's a tall man with graying side whiskers and the soft, clean hands of someone who never has to do physical labor. He exudes an air of benevolent authority, the kind of man who believes absolutely in his own rightness, and his carriage is lined with leather that cost more than your last ball gown. He is ushered into the morning room, where you are waiting on a chaise longue, dressed in your plainest morning gown, your hair smoothed back, your hands clasped in your lap like a penitent child. Your husband is present, standing at the mantelpiece with his arms crossed, and the entire scene is arranged like a tribunal. Dr. Ashford asks a series of questions, his voice gentle and probing. How is your appetite? Have you been weeping without cause? Do you experience palpitations, hot flashes, strange fancies? Are you able to attend to your household duties with your usual diligence? Do you feel morose, irritable, or subject to fits of excitement? He doesn't ask about the laudanum because he already knows. He's the one prescribing it. Instead, he examines your pulse, looks into your eyes, and makes a series of thoughtful hums. The diagnosis is delivered with the same calm certainty as a weather report: hysteria. A classic case, he says, likely originating in the womb and spreading its influence through the nervous system. The uterus, he explains, is a delicate organ prone to wander, to excite the brain, to disrupt the rational faculties. Rest is the only cure. Complete rest, away from all intellectual and emotional stimulation. You know what this means. The rest cure. It was invented by a celebrated American physician named Silas Weir Mitchell, and it had been enthusiastically adopted by the British medical establishment. The treatment was simple. Isolate the patient. Confine her to bed. Forbid all visitors. Letters, books, sewing, painting, even conversation. Feed her a diet of milk and beef broth until she gains weight. Allow her nothing to think about, nothing to feel, nothing to do. The theory was that the female nervous system was like a bank account, and all mental activity was a withdrawal. To cure hysteria, you had to bankrupt the brain so completely that it reset itself. In practice, it was a form of torture that broke strong women like twigs. You try to object. You say you feel much better today, that last night was just fatigue, that you'll be more careful, you'll try harder to be a better wife. Your voice rises and you hear the edge of desperation in it. Dr. Ashford nods sympathetically and writes a note in his little book, probably recording emotional excitability. Your husband doesn't meet your eyes. The doctor knows best, my dear, he says. I've instructed the housekeeper to prepare the small bedroom at the back of the house. You'll be moved there this afternoon. No visitors, no correspondence. The servants have been told not to speak to you beyond what is strictly necessary. And, just like that, the cage door swings shut. The small bedroom is on the north side of the house, where the light is gray even at noon. It contains a bed, a washstand, a single chair, and nothing else. The wallpaper is faded and patterned with roses that seem to crawl in the corner of your vision. All your personal effects are stripped away. No books, no embroidery frame, no writing desk. Even the mirror is removed, because seeing your own reflection is considered a potential source of excitement. You are allowed to lie in bed, stare at the ceiling, and drink the beef broth that a silent maid brings 3 times a day. And you are allowed your nerve tonic because Dr. Ashford has graciously agreed to continue the laudanum prescription. You need it even more now. The boredom is so vast, so suffocating, that you think you might actually go mad from it. But that's the point, isn't it? They're breaking you so they can rebuild you into something more convenient. The days begin to blur. You lie in the gray light and listen to the sounds of the house, footsteps that never approach your door, the distant clink of silver being polished, the muffled carriage wheels outside. You count the roses on the wallpaper and discover there are exactly 347 of them, and they all look different after the laudanum kicks in. Sometimes they seem to breathe. Sometimes they seem to bleed. You can't tell anyone about this, because that would be a symptom, and symptoms mean more rest, more isolation, more months of this living death. But here is the thing that the doctors never admit. This rest cure isn't a cure at all. It's punishment. It's social control dressed up in medical jargon. If a wife cries too much, she's hysterical. If she's angry, she's hysterical. If she shows any emotion that inconveniences her husband, she's hysterical. And once that label is applied, her legal non-existence becomes terrifyingly real. A husband can have his wife committed to an asylum with nothing more than the signature of 2 doctors. The Lunacy Act of 1845 made it shockingly easy, and private asylums, the sort that cater to the upper classes, are full of women whose only crime was being difficult. You've heard the whispers. A countess confined for moral insanity because she refused to sign over her inheritance. A baroness locked away for nymphomania because she dared to enjoy the company of a man who wasn't her husband. A merchant's wife who spent 20 years in a madhouse because she argued with her spouse in public. These stories are the dark matter of Victorian society, invisible and everywhere, holding the whole edifice in place. And now you are one of them. Or you will be, if you don't find a way out. Because Dr. Ashford has hinted, in his gentle, bedside manner, that if the rest cure at home doesn't produce the desired improvement, a private sanatorium in the country might be the next step. He said it the way you might suggest a holiday by the sea, and your husband nodded as if he were considering a new horse. The realization hits you in the middle of a gray afternoon, as the laudanum haze is thinning and the wallpaper roses are starting to look a little too alive. You are not a patient. You are being processed for disposal. The pivot happens on the 14th day of your confinement. You've lost track of the exact date, but you know it's a Thursday, because the parlor maid's footsteps are different on Thursdays. She polishes the silver in the pantry, and the rhythmic rub of the cloth has been the only marker of time you have left. A new sound comes, a carriage clattering into the courtyard earlier than the doctor's usual call. Voices in the hall, your husband's low tones, and then a woman's voice, crisp and unfamiliar. The door to your room opens, and it's not the maid with broth. It's a woman in a plain gray traveling dress, a notebook in her hand, and she's looking at you with an expression you haven't seen in weeks. Interest. She introduces herself as Miss Felicity Bradshaw, an investigator from a charitable society that looks into the welfare of women confined to private care. She's not a doctor. She's not a relative. She's something far more dangerous, a reformer, a loose cannon. The society had received an anonymous letter, she says, concerning the increase in laudanum prescriptions among women in the district, and your name had come up because of the volume of medicine ordered for this household through the local apothecary. She asks you a series of questions, very different from Dr. Ashford's. She asks if you consented to the rest cure, if you know what's in your nerve tonic, if you understand your legal rights, or rather, your lack of them. And for the first time in weeks, someone looks at you like you might be a person, not a diagnosis. But the door is ajar, and beyond it you hear footsteps. Your husband is approaching. He will not tolerate this interview. He will throw Miss Bradshaw out, and her report will be buried, and you will be sent to the sanatorium even faster now, because you've become a liability. You have perhaps 60 seconds to decide. Do you tell her everything? Risk the sanatorium? Risk the scandal? Risk the complete destruction of your social existence? Or do you lie, smile, perform the part of the compliant invalid, and sink back into the gray, laudanum-soaked fog until you disappear entirely? You look at Miss Bradshaw, and she holds your gaze. But you can already hear your husband's hand on the door handle. Make your choice. You hear your husband's hand close around the brass door handle. The latch clicks, the hinges sigh, and the narrow rectangle of hallway light widens into a doorway full of restrained fury. He's wearing his public face, the one reserved for servants and social inferiors. But his eyes are chips of flint. "Miss Bradshaw," he says, and the name drips with the kind of cold courtesy that makes you want to apologize for existing. "I was not informed we had a visitor. My wife is under strict medical orders. No callers. I trust you haven't disturbed her." Miss Bradshaw turns, and you watch her spine straighten. She is not cowed. That's the first thing you notice. She doesn't flutter or simper or perform any of the elaborate submission rituals that every other woman in your orbit has mastered. She simply says, "I was given to understand that your wife's seclusion was voluntary, sir. I wished to confirm that directly with the patient." The law is rather specific on the point of consent, even for married women under coverture. She uses the word coverture like a scalpel, and you watch your husband's face darken. He knows what it means, and he knows that this woman is not here by accident. But your husband has spent decades navigating boardrooms and parliamentary functions. He doesn't flinch. "My wife is unwell. She is not competent to give or withhold consent. Her physician, Dr. Ashford of Harley Street, will confirm this. I am acting in her best interests, as a husband is legally and morally bound to do. Now, I must ask you to leave." He steps aside, holding the door open, and the gesture is a dismissal so absolute that any normal caller would already be halfway out the front door. But Miss Bradshaw doesn't move. She turns back to you, and in that single suspended second, her gaze asks the question again. Speak or stay silent. Your throat is a locked box. Your husband is watching, and beyond him, you can see the maid hovering in the corridor, her white cap like a signal flag of domestic surveillance. If you speak, it will be reported. If you speak, Dr. Ashford will write paranoid delusions in his notebook. If you speak, the sanatorium in the country is no longer a threat. It's a certainty. But if you stay silent, the gray room will swallow you back into its wallpaper roses, and Miss Bradshaw will walk out the front door and never return, and you will disappear piece by piece until there's nothing left of you but a well-dressed, laudanum-soaked ghost who obeys every rule. So you do the only thing you can think of. You cough. A weak, wet, consumptive little cough into your handkerchief, and as you bring the white linen to your lips, you let your eyes meet Miss Bradshaw's one last time. You lower the handkerchief and shake your head slowly, the movement barely perceptible, the universal gesture of someone who is not allowed to speak. Then you look deliberately at the laudanum bottle on the bedside table, the little brown glass vessel with Dr. Ashford's label, and you look back at her. It's not a confession, it's not even a statement. It's a trail of breadcrumbs, and she follows your gaze like a hound catching a scent. She nods once, almost imperceptibly, and then she turns to your husband with a smile that could freeze the Thames. "I'll see myself out, Mr. Ashworth. But I should tell you, I'll be filing a report with the Lunacy Commission. They take an interest when a woman under treatment is denied visitors. I am sure Dr. Ashford can explain his procedures to the commissioners. Good day." And she sweeps out, her gray skirt rustling like a battle standard, leaving behind a stunned silence and a faint scent of lavender and indignation. Your husband doesn't speak for a long moment. He closes the door with exaggerated gentleness, the way a cat stalks a mouse, and when he finally turns to you, his voice is almost conversational. "You've made a very serious error. That's all." He doesn't shout. He never shouts. He simply walks out and the lock clicks behind him, a sound so final it might be a coffin lid. The next few days accelerate into nightmare. Dr. Ashford arrives again, this time with a colleague, a younger man with a notebook and an expression of eager cruelty. They examine you together, asking questions that are really traps. And when you try to explain about the laudanum, about the way the roses move on the wallpaper, about the fact that you haven't been allowed to walk outside for 16 days, they exchange glances that say, "Confirms the diagnosis." Dr. Ashford's colleague, whose name you catch as Dr. Thornhill, specializes in refractory female cases. He has a private establishment in the country, a converted manor house in Surrey with excellent grounds and a very high success rate. Success, you understand, means a patient who no longer complains. All of this happens with the smooth efficiency of a business transaction. There are no legal proceedings, no hearings, no chance to speak in your own defense. The Lunacy Act of 1845 requires only 2 medical signatures and the consent of a husband or male relative. That's it. A woman can be confined indefinitely for moral insanity, for melancholia, for nervous excitement, for the catch-all diagnosis of hysteria that covers everything from postpartum depression to righteous anger. And you have just demonstrated, in the most perfect and damning way, that you possess all 3. The morning of your removal dawns gray and wet. The carriage arrives with curtains drawn, and you are escorted downstairs by 2 of Dr. Thornhill's attendants, women with strong arms and expressionless faces who know exactly how to handle a struggling patient without leaving a mark. Your husband does not come to say goodbye. He's at his club, you later learn, and the servants have been instructed to treat your departure as a routine event. Like the weekly laundry collection, the housekeeper hands you a small valise containing a nightgown, a hairbrush, and a Bible, and she doesn't meet your eyes. The other servants have vanished. You are being erased in real time. The carriage ride takes hours, and the curtains stay drawn. You try to count turns, but the laudanum haze makes the world a smear of sound and motion, and by the time the wheels crunch onto gravel and the door opens, you have no idea where you are. The building that looms before you is beautiful in the way a mausoleum is beautiful. Ivy-covered stone, mullioned windows, a sweep of lawn that looks perfectly manicured and utterly dead. A sign by the gate reads Grove House Sanatorium for Ladies. The word ladies is tastefully small, as if the inmates are simply guests at a prolonged country party. Inside, the smell hits you first. It's a mixture of boiled cabbage, carbolic soap, and something else, something feral and sad that you can't quite identify. The entry hall is elegant, a grandfather clock, a vase of fresh flowers, a pattern of blue and gold on the wallpaper. But the elegance is a skin stretched over rot. The corridors are lined with closed doors, and behind those doors you hear sounds that slip under the cracks. A woman weeping in a rhythmic, hopeless drone, another woman singing the same line of a hymn over and over, a sudden scream that cuts off as abruptly as it starts. The attendants don't react, they've stopped hearing it. Your room is on the 2nd floor, and it's smaller than the one at home. The window is barred, not visibly, But the sash is nailed shut, and the glass is reinforced with wire mesh so fine, you almost don't notice it until you try to press your face against the pane. The bed is iron, bolted to the floor. The mattress is crin, the Victorian equivalent of horsehair, and it crackles when you move. There is no mirror, no writing materials, no personal effects permitted. You are a non-person in a non-place, and this is where you are supposed to get better. The first few days are a blur of institutional routine. A nurse wakes you at 6 with a cup of watery tea. You are examined by Dr. Thornhill, who asks the same questions Dr. Ashford asked, except now your answers are recorded in a ledger that you will never be allowed to read. You are fed a diet of milk puddings and mutton broth, because the rest cure demands fattening the body while starving the mind. The laudanum is continued, but the dose is carefully controlled, and you realize with a stab of terror that they're not trying to help you withdraw. They're using it to keep you docile. A docile patient is a manageable patient. A manageable patient is profitable. But here is the thing you start to notice. As the days accumulate and the laudanum fog thins just enough to let you think, you are not alone. The building is full of women like you, and their stories, whispered during the brief, supervised walks in the walled garden, or exchanged in glances across the dining room, paint a picture far larger than your own misfortune. There's a baron's wife who was committed after she refused to sign over her inheritance to her husband's gambling debts. There's a young heiress locked up for moral insanity because she tried to marry a man her father didn't approve of. There's a lady who committed the unforgivable sin of writing a novel, a slightly scandalous one, and her husband decided that no sane woman would do such a thing. There's a woman who cried too much after her baby died, and the tears were diagnosed as religious melancholia. Every single one of them was inconvenient. Every single one of them was wealthy enough that their inconvenient behavior was a financial liability. And every single one of them is now being chemically and psychologically broken down, piece by piece, in a system that calls it healing. The revelation crystallizes during an encounter in the garden. You are walking slowly along the gravel path, your arm linked with a woman named Eleanor, the same Eleanor from your calling circle, the one Lady Catherine mentioned at the dinner party. She looks older than you remember, her eyes hollow, her hair thinner, but she's still there, still breathing, still capable of a bitter little smile when she recognizes you. She tells you how she got here. A screaming fight with her husband, a doctor called in the middle of the night, a signature on a paper, and suddenly she was property again, property that could be stored out of sight. She tells you that she hasn't seen her children in 7 months. 7 months! And when she asked Dr. Thornhill when she might be allowed to write to them, he told her that maternal feeling was itself a symptom of her nervous disorder. The love for her own children was being treated as a sickness. That night, you lie on your crackling mattress and stare at the barred window, and the full architecture of the system starts to come clear. It's not just about controlling one difficult wife. It's about maintaining an entire social order. If women like you, wealthy, educated, connected women, were allowed to show pain or anger or defiance, the whole edifice of Victorian domesticity would tremble. The husband's authority, the doctor's authority, the law's authority, they all depend on the fiction that women are fragile creatures who need to be managed. If even one of you broke free and told the truth, the fiction might start to crack. So the system is designed to absorb that threat, to diagnose it, pathologize it, and lock it away behind ivy-covered walls where nobody has to look at it. But wait, it gets even bigger. Because while you are lying there piecing together the domestic conspiracy, you are slowly realizing something else about the little brown bottle on your bedside table. The laudanum that kept you quiet in Mayfair is the same substance that's keeping you quiet in the sanatorium, and the opium that makes that laudanum comes from somewhere. Your husband, you remember, has investments in a shipping concern that runs between Liverpool and Bombay. He's mentioned it at dinner parties, always with that smug little smile, the one that says he's a modern man of commerce. The British Empire, in the 1860s, is floating on a sea of opium. The East India Company, before its dissolution, built its fortunes on the opium trade with China. British merchants smuggle the drug by the ton, fighting literal wars to keep the market open. And here, in the home counties, that same drug is being poured down the throats of middle and upper-class women by the barrel. Laudanum is cheap, morphine is newly injectable, and doctors like Ashford and Thornhill are essentially running a domestic distribution network, transforming imperial violence into feminine docility. The wife's quiet is paid for in Chinese lives, and the connection is as direct as a shipping manifest. Your personal prison is a microcosm of the British Empire, and the walls are mortared with opium. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. The doctor's rounds become a ritual of chemical dependency. The asylum's calm is a product of mass sedation. And the women who scream in the night aren't insane. They're in withdrawal, or they're fighting back, or they're simply expressing emotions that any human being would feel in a situation of profound, institutionalized cruelty. The system calls them mad so it doesn't have to call itself criminal. But now a new element enters. Miss Bradshaw's report, it turns out, was not entirely buried. A letter arrives for Dr. Thornhill, and you learn of it through the gossip network of the servants. One of the kitchen maids has a cousin who works at the post office. The Lunacy Commission is sending an inspector. An inspector is a rare and dangerous thing. A man with the legal authority to interview patients, review records, and, in theory, order the release of anyone confined without just cause. In practice, inspectors are usually doctors themselves, part of the same professional fraternity, and they rarely find anything amiss. But the fact that one is coming at all means that someone, somewhere, is asking questions. Dr. Thornhill is nervous. You see it in the way he trims his beard more carefully, the way the nurses are suddenly stricter about the rules. The patients are being prepared. The ones who are too visibly distressed are moved to private rooms on the top floor. The ones who might talk are given extra doses of chloral hydrate, a sedative that makes the tongue thick and the memory porous. You realize that if you are going to make your case to the inspector, you will have to do it while fighting against a chemical fog, against the accumulated weight of your diagnosis, and against the fact that your own signature on any complaint will be discredited because you are, legally speaking, a lunatic whose word means nothing. The morning of the inspection, you are dressed in your best evening gown, the emerald green velvet from the dinner party, which someone has thoughtfully packed into your valise. It's a strange choice, completely inappropriate for daytime, for institutional life. But you understand the message. You are being presented as a lady of society, not a prisoner. The dress is a costume, and if you play your part, the inspector will see what he expects to see, a collection of delicate, well-bred women recovering from nervous complaints in a comfortable country retreat. You are supposed to smile, to curtsy, to answer his questions with the same performance you once gave at dinner parties. And Dr. Thornhill has made it very clear that if you fail this performance, the consequences will be severe. The top floor, he implies, is where the really difficult cases go, and they don't come back down. But you have spent your entire life learning to perform. You are a master of the art of looking perfect while falling apart inside. And you've realized something else. In the long hours of gray light and barred windows, the performance itself can be a weapon. If they want a perfect lady, you will give them one so perfect that the cracks will be visible only to someone who knows how to look. And Miss Bradshaw, you hope, will know how to look, because the inspector is arriving at 3 o'clock, and his assistant, the note-taker who will accompany him, is a woman, a volunteer from the charitable society. A Miss Bradshaw. The clock in the hallway chimes the quarter hour. The carriage wheels crunch on the gravel. Downstairs, the doorbell rings, and you sit on the edge of your iron bed, your emerald silk rustling like a whisper, your corset laced just tight enough to make you feel faint, and you wait. The inspection is about to begin. The game, the real one, the one you weren't supposed to realize you were playing, has just entered its final act. And this time, you are not planning to lose without a fight. But the secret that Dr. Thornhill is hiding, the one that will blow the doors off this place entirely, is not in his ledger book. It's in the little brown bottle on your nightstand, and it's about to be uncorked in front of everyone. The footsteps on the stairs are deliberate, slow, heavy with institutional authority. You hear the murmur of male voices first. Dr. Thornhill's unctuous baritone layered over the inspector's crisp inquiries, a duet of polite menace. Then a third voice, quieter, sharper, Miss Bradshaw's. The sound of her boots on the floorboards is lighter but no less determined, and your heart, which had been beating somewhere around your corseted solar plexus, does a strange little stutter. She came. She actually came. A nurse opens the door without knocking. She's a stout woman with forearms like Christmas hams and a face that has forgotten how to smile. The inspector will see you now, Mrs. Ashworth, in the doctor's study. You are to follow me and speak when spoken to. She eyes your emerald gown with a flicker of suspicion, as if a dress could hide a weapon. In your world, it can. You rise from the iron bed, smooth the velvet over your crinoline, and walk down the corridor with the posture of a queen processing to her own execution. Dr. Thornhill's study is a room designed to intimidate. The walls are lined with medical texts bound in dark leather, their spines stamped with Latin words that sound like diseases. A large mahogany desk dominates the center, and behind it, Dr. Thornhill sits in a high-backed chair that might as well be a throne. The inspector, a Mr. Collins, is a portly man with mutton chop whiskers and the practiced neutrality of a bureaucrat who has learned not to see too much. Miss Bradshaw stands by the window, her notebook open, her pen poised. She catches your eye for a fraction of a second, and you understand this is the stage, and the performance you are about to give will determine whether you ever walk out of this building on your own 2 feet. Dr. Thornhill gestures to a chair. Please, Mrs. Ashworth, do sit down. Mr. Collins has a few routine questions. Nothing to be alarmed about. His smile is a thin slice of reassurance, but his knuckles are white where he grips the arm of his chair. He's afraid. You can smell it under his expensive cologne, and that realization gives you the first genuine calm you've felt in weeks. The questions begin. Mr. Collins asks about your health, your appetite, your sleep. He asks if you understand why you are here, and you answer with the measured sweetness of a woman who has spent 20 years learning to say the right thing. Yes, you had a nervous complaint. Yes, your husband and Dr. Ashford thought a period of rest would be beneficial. Yes, Dr. Thornhill has been most attentive. You let each answer hang in the air like a perfectly placed chess piece, and you watch Dr. Thornhill's shoulders loosen infinitesimally with every obedient syllable. Good. Let him think you've been tamed. Then Miss Bradshaw speaks. Mrs. Ashworth, I notice you are wearing a rather formal gown for a morning interview. Was that your choice, Doctor? Thornhill cuts in. We encourage our ladies to maintain standards of propriety. It's part of the therapeutic process. But the question was a gift, and you know it. You smile, and you let your gaze drift toward the window, toward the ivy that covers the bars. I wear what I am given, you say, your voice light and uninflected. I have no other clothes. My husband's housekeeper packed only this dress and a nightgown. I assume they anticipated a short stay, but it has been several weeks now. One does what one can. The words are polite, but the information they carry is lethal. I am here without my possessions, without my consent, and I have no idea when I will leave. Mr. Collins frowns slightly, his pen pausing. Dr. Thornhill's smile freezes. A simple oversight, he says. I'll have the nurse arrange additional garments. Now, Mr. Collins, perhaps we might step into the garden. Some of our ladies are taking the air. You can see the recreational opportunities we provide. He's trying to move the inspection away from you, away from any uncomfortable question. But Miss Bradshaw isn't finished. I'd like to remain with Mrs. Ashworth, if you please. I have a few more questions for my report. Woman to woman, you understand. Some matters are delicate. She says it with such demure professionalism that Mr. Collins nods absently, already rising. Dr. Thornhill hesitates. For a single, stretched second. You see the calculation in his eyes? If he refuses, he looks like he has something to hide. If he agrees, he leaves you alone with the one person who might actually listen. He agrees, but his parting glance promises consequences. The door closes. The study is silent, except for the ticking of a clock and the scratch of Miss Bradshaw's pen. She doesn't waste time. Quickly, she says, her voice low. The inspector is a good man, but he's under pressure. The commission is overwhelmed, and Dr. Thornhill's establishment has a reputation for excellence. To change anything, I need evidence. Something concrete. Is there something you can show me? You don't hesitate. You reach into the pocket of your gown, where you've hidden the little brown bottle. The one you managed to secrete away from the morning dose by pretending to swallow. The nurse was distracted, and your hand was quicker than her attention. You place it on the desk between you. Laudanum, you say. Prescribed by Dr. Ashford and continued by Dr. Thornhill. Every patient here receives it, some in larger doses than others. It's how they keep us quiet. The rest cure isn't about rest. It's about sedation. If you examine the dispensary records, you'll find enough opium to supply a small army. Miss Bradshaw picks up the bottle, turns it in the gray light. Her face is very still, but her eyes are bright with fury. I suspected as much. The apothecary records for this district show orders that far exceed any legitimate medical need. But I needed a witness. I needed someone willing to say it. She looks at you with an expression that is almost reverence. Are you willing to say it? In writing, it will mean a public scandal. Your husband will almost certainly divorce you. You will lose your home, your social position, possibly any contact with your children. Are you absolutely certain? You think about the gray room, the iron bed, the woman screaming in the night. You think about Eleanor, who hasn't seen her children in 7 months. You think about the wallpaper roses that move when you stare at them too long, and the way your hands shake when the next dose is late, and you realize that you have already lost everything they could take from you. The only thing left is the truth, and the truth is the only weapon you have left. Yes, you say, I am certain. Give me the paper. She produces a sheet of official stationery from her case, dips her pen in the inkwell, and you begin to write. Not a polite, ladylike confession, but a detailed account of every dose, every restraint, every lie. Dr. Ashford's collusion, Dr. Thornhill's chemical prison, your husband's signature on the committal papers, the ship that brings opium from Bombay to Liverpool, so that wives can be silenced in Mayfair. You write until your hand cramps, and when you finish, you sign your name with a flourish that feels like a declaration of war. Miss Bradshaw folds the paper carefully, seals it in an inner pocket of her cloak, and rises. I'll get this to the commission. I can't promise what will happen, but I can promise that Grove House will not escape notice. Now, I must catch up with Mr. Collins before Dr. Thornhill becomes suspicious. Wait here. Trust no one. She's at the door, already half in the corridor, when she pauses and looks back. You are very brave, Mrs. Ashworth. Braver than I think, you know. Then she's gone, and the clock resumes its indifferent ticking. The rest of the inspection passes in a blur of forced pleasantries. Mr. Collins returns, and Dr. Thornhill pours sherry, and everyone behaves as if the world hasn't just shifted on its axis. But you can feel the change. Dr. Thornhill keeps glancing at you with something uneasy behind his professional mask. He knows something happened in this room, but he doesn't know what, and the uncertainty is eating at him. When the inspector's carriage finally rolls away down the gravel drive, you are left standing by the barred window, watching the red taillights disappear into the trees, and the silence that settles over Grove House is the silence of a held breath. The aftermath unfolds in slow motion. 2 days pass, then 3, with no word from the outside world. Dr. Thornhill is icily correct. Your laudanum dose is not reduced, but it's not increased either. The nurses watch you more closely, but there are no reprisals. It's as if the institution is holding its breath, waiting for a blow that has already been struck, but hasn't yet landed. You spend the hours lying on your bed, staring at the ceiling, running through every possible outcome in your mind. The best case. The commission investigates. The sanatorium is closed, the patients are released, and you walk free. The worst case. The report is buried, Miss Bradshaw is discredited, and you are sent to the top floor. The place where the really difficult cases go. The place from which no one returns. On the 4th day, the blow lands. A carriage clatters into the courtyard, and this time, it's not an inspector. It's a lawyer, a young man with a briefcase and a harried expression, who demands to see Dr. Thornhill immediately. You learn of the conversation only through the grapevine. The kitchen maid's cousin at the post office has been busy, but the gist is clear. The Lunacy Commission has received a formal complaint, supported by sworn testimony, regarding the excessive use of narcotics and the improper confinement of several women at Grove House. An official inquiry has been opened. Dr. Thornhill, the maid whispers, is in a rage. He's burning papers in the back grate. He's sending telegrams to Harley Street. He's desperately trying to build a wall of medical respectability before the tide comes in. And the tide comes faster than anyone expects. Within a fortnight, 2 more inspectors arrive, and this time they're not polite. They bring constables. They bring a warrant to search the premises. They go through Dr. Thornhill's records like a hot knife through butter, and what they find is worse than even you imagined. The dispensary ledger shows quantities of laudanum, morphine, and chloral hydrate that would make an army surgeon blanch. The patient files are filled with diagnoses of hysteria, melancholia, moral insanity, all of them rubber-stamped without proper examination, all of them serving as the flimsiest pretext for incarceration. And the financial records reveal a network of payments, from husbands eager to dispose of inconvenient wives, from families who wanted an embarrassing aunt out of the way, from doctors who took a percentage of the patient's quarterly fees. Grove House wasn't a hospital. It was a dumping ground, a business, and Dr. Thornhill, with his beautiful grounds and his professional manner, was running the most genteel prison in England. The scandal breaks in the London newspapers. Ladies' Sanatorium exposed. Shocking revelations of drugged patients and false committals. The headlines scream. The reading public, always hungry for a story of upper-class depravity, devours the details. There are questions in Parliament. The editorials demand reform. The medical establishment closes ranks. But even the most prestigious journals are forced to acknowledge that the system of private asylums is rotten with abuse. Dr. Ashford's name appears in the reports, and his Harley Street practice experiences a sudden, mysterious exodus of female patients. Your husband, whose shipping interests in the opium trade are now uncomfortably public, finds himself the subject of pointed questions in the financial press. The scandal ripples outward, touching every corner of the glittering machine you once inhabited. And you are released. The Commission's inquiry concludes that your confinement was unjustified, that the rest cure as practiced at Grove House amounted to medicalized imprisonment, and that you are not, and never have been, a lunatic. The words are printed on a certificate that you will keep for the rest of your life. The morning you walk out of Grove House, the ivy on the walls looks less like a decoration and more like a strangling vine that has finally loosened its grip. You have no home to return to. Your husband has made it clear through his solicitor that you are no longer welcome under his roof, but you have something more valuable, your freedom, and a story that the world is finally ready to hear. But the victory is not complete, because as you stand on the gravel drive, watching the door of the sanatorium close behind you, you realize that you are one of the lucky ones. For every woman released from Grove House, there are dozens more still inside, in institutions that the Commission hasn't reached, in homes where the rest cure is still enforced by husbands and doctors who face no scrutiny. The system hasn't been dismantled. It's been dented. And the forces that built it, the legal doctrine of coverture, the medical pathologization of female emotion, the economic engine of the opium trade are all still very much intact. You find refuge with a distant cousin who lives in a small, unfashionable village in the Cotswolds. She's a widow with a sharp tongue and a library full of books considered unsuitable for ladies, and she takes you in without asking too many questions. In her quiet parlor, you begin to write, not the polite letters and calling cards of your former life, but the true story of what happened to you. You write about the dinner party and the laudanum, about the gray room and the iron bed, about Eleanor and the Baron's wife and the woman who cried too much after her baby died. You write about the way a society built on silk and whalebone can crush the life out of a woman while calling it love. And when you finish, you don't send it to a publisher. You send a copy to Miss Bradshaw, and another to the editor of a magazine that has been sympathetic to the reform cause. The publication of your account, under a pseudonym to protect your cousin from scandal, becomes a sensation. It's not the first exposé of madhouse abuses, but it's the most detailed, the most personal, the most damning. Other women begin to come forward with their own stories. The quiet wave of hysteria, diagnosis, and laudanum dependency that had been hidden behind drawing-room curtains starts to become visible as what it truly was, an epidemic of despair, chemically suppressed by a society that preferred its women silent. But here is the final, devastating twist. While you were rotting in Grove House, the very men who profited from your confinement were building something even larger. The opium trade that supplied your nerve tonic didn't just silence wealthy wives, it was bankrolling the British Empire. The same East India Company merchants who shipped opium to China were now importing it to Liverpool for domestic consumption. The same doctors who prescribed laudanum to hysterical wives were shareholders in the pharmaceutical companies that manufactured it. The same husbands who signed committal papers were members of Parliament who voted down reform bills. The personal and the political were always the same thing. You just hadn't been able to see it until you were locked in a room with nothing but time and a bottle of opium. And the medical establishment, far from being reformed by the scandal, adapted. Dr. Thornhill lost his license, but a dozen other doctors simply rebranded their methods. The rest cure became the separation cure. Laudanum became chlorodyne, a new patent medicine with the same active ingredient. Hysteria became neurasthenia, then nervous exhaustion, then whatever diagnosis was fashionable that year. The names changed, but the substance remained. Women's emotions were still a disease to be cured, and the cure was still a chemical prison, dressed up in a white coat. Decades later, in the closing years of the 19th century, a new generation of women would take up the fight you had glimpsed through a barred window. They would campaign for the rights of married women to own property, to sue in court, to retain custody of their children. Josephine Butler would challenge the Contagious Diseases Acts, which allowed the police to forcibly examine any woman suspected of prostitution, a law that effectively criminalized female bodies. The Langham Place Circle would publish essays demanding education and employment for women, and slowly, painfully, the legal architecture of male control would begin to crack. The Married Women's Property Act of 1882, the Matrimonial Causes Act, the slow, grinding work of reform that would take another century and more. But none of that was visible from the gravel drive of Grove House on the day you walked free. What you saw was the ivy, still growing, still climbing, still wrapping itself around every institution that held women captive. And you understood, with a clarity that stung like the first breath after a too-tight corset is unlaced, that the struggle was not over. It had barely begun. The final image that stays with you, years later, is not the courtroom or the newspaper headline or the sympathetic faces of the friends who took you in. It's the face of Eleanor, glimpsed through a barred window as your carriage pulled away. She was waving, she was smiling, and she was still inside, because her husband had refused to release her, because the commission's inquiry had not reached her particular case, because the law still considered her his property. You promised yourself you would get her out, and eventually, after 2 more years of letters and legal petitions, you did. But by then she was changed, hollowed out by laudanum and loneliness, a woman who had learned to survive by disappearing into herself. She never fully returned. And that is the quiet, persistent truth at the heart of the Victorian gilded cage. The dresses were beautiful. The dinner parties were dazzling. The crystal chandeliers sparkled like captured stars. But behind every silk curtain, in every private room, there was a woman counting the hours until her next dose of nerve tonic, a woman whose life had been reduced to a diagnosis and a prescription. The filthy rich of Victorian England didn't just live in luxury. They lived inside a system that traded female souls for opium, that called imprisonment therapy, and that smiled while it broke the people it claimed to protect. The quiet wave of hysteria and laudanum dependency never truly ended. It simply changed its name, over and over, until we forgot what it was. But the women who survived it, the ones who wrote the letters, who testified before the commissions, who dared to raise their voices above a whisper, they left us a legacy that is still unfolding. And the next time you see a period drama with its ball gowns and its brooding dukes, remember the little brown bottle. It was always there, just out of frame, holding the real story of what life was like for the women who lived in the most beautiful prison ever built. So where does that leave us when the last crystal chandelier has been dimmed and the last calling card slipped under a silver salver? The most beautiful prison ever built didn't vanish when Victoria died. It simply remodeled. The corsets softened into girdles. The crinolines shrank into pencil skirts. The nerve tonics rebranded themselves as mother's little helpers. And the rest cure morphed into the quiet suburb where a woman can have everything and still feel like she's disappearing behind the wallpaper. The names change: hysteria, neurasthenia, anxiety, burnout. But the question hums beneath every iteration: whose comfort does her silence serve? Consider the numbers. In 1859, a physician claimed that more than 1/4 of all women suffered from hysteria. That's 1 in 4. Today, we don't use that word, but we have others. We have charts and prescriptions and wellness apps, and we still, in 1,000 subtle ways, tell women that their pain is probably psychosomatic, their anger is probably hormones, and their exhaustion is probably their own fault for not managing their time better. The Victorian doctor who diagnosed a wife with nervous excitement because she cried at dinner is not so different from the modern specialist who writes a script for something that will take the edge off without asking what made the edge so sharp in the first place. The little brown bottle has gone digital, but the transaction remains. Take this, be quiet, and the system will keep running. And the system is vast. It always was. One wife in a barred room in Surrey was the visible tip of an invisible mountain. Beneath her were the women in the private asylums, the ones whose husbands never faced a reformer, the ones who died behind ivy-covered walls with a diagnosis of general paralysis of the insane. On their death certificates, beneath them were the women in the workhouses, whose madness was cold laziness and whose treatment was a cold bath and a straitjacket. Beneath them were the colonized women in India and China, whose bodies were collateral damage in the opium wars that supplied the very drug that kept Mayfair wives compliant. The gilded cage wasn't just a metaphor. It was a node in a global network of extraction and suppression. The silk dresses came from mills where women worked 16-hour days for pennies. The sugar on the tea tray came from plantations, worked by enslaved people. The morphine in the nerve tonic came from poppy fields watered by imperial violence. Every glittering surface was built on someone else's suffering. And the Victorian wife was both a victim of that machine and, in her obliviousness, a cog. Yet there is another side to this story, and it's the one that rarely gets told. The same gilded cage that trapped women also forged some of the most formidable activists in history. The women who survived the rest cure and the madhouse and the diagnosis of hysteria didn't all disappear into silence. Some of them, like the fictionalized version of you who walked out of Grove House, began to write. They wrote pamphlets and petitions and letters to the editor. They testified before parliamentary committees. They founded reform societies with names like the Ladies' Institute and the Moral Reform Union. They campaigned for the right to own property, to enter universities, to train as doctors themselves so that no woman would ever again be at the mercy of a male physician who thought her uterus controlled her brain. Elizabeth Garrett Anderson, the first woman to qualify as a doctor in Britain, was told that medicine was no profession for a lady. She did it anyway, and she did it while the rest cure was still being prescribed in Harley Street. The pushback was real, and it was relentless, and it was fueled by the very same desperation that drove so many others to the laudanum bottle. The Married Women's Property Act of 1882, which finally allowed wives to own property in their own name, wasn't a gift from a benevolent parliament. It was clawed into existence by decades of lobbying by women who had seen their fortunes stolen by husbands who had been committed to asylums on the flimsiest pretexts, who had lost their children because the law said a father's rights were absolute. Every paragraph of that legislation was written in the ink of 1,000 hidden stories. And yet, even after the act passed, a husband could still commit his wife to an asylum with 2 doctors' signatures. That didn't change until the Mental Deficiency Act of 1913, and even then the power imbalance remained profound. The last private madhouse in Britain didn't close until the 1980s. The echoes are long. So when we look back at the Victorian filthy rich, with their 18-course dinners and their whalebone corsets and their calling cards, we're not looking at a quaint costume drama. We're looking at the fossilized remains of a structure that is still, in many ways, standing. The expectations placed on women to be beautiful, to be accommodating, to manage the household's emotional temperature while suppressing their own, didn't vanish with the motor car. They shape-shifted. The postpartum depression that's still stigmatized, the burnout that's still diagnosed as anxiety without examining the structural pressures that cause it, the working mother who is asked, with a straight face, how she manages to have it all, as if the question itself isn't a Victorian relic, the woman who is told her health complaints are probably just stress, while a man with identical symptoms is sent for tests. The gilded cage now has Wi-Fi, but the bars are still there, and they're still surprisingly sharp. But here is the thing that the Victorian reformers discovered, and that every generation has to rediscover. Cages, even gilded ones, can be unlocked from the inside. The women who walked out of Grove House, whether literally or through the slow exit of legal reform, did so because they found each other. They shared their stories across the walls of their separate prisons, whispering through the bars, passing notes hidden in laundry, writing letters that could have ruined them but didn't. The isolation that was the cage's most effective weapon was broken by the simplest act. One woman listening to another and saying, "Me too." That's not sentimental. It's strategic. It's the reason the reform movement succeeded. And it's the reason the little brown bottle never quite managed to keep everyone quiet. So tonight, as you drift towards sleep, you might find yourself picturing those London streets, the clip of horses' hooves on wet cobblestones, the soft glow of gaslight through drawn curtains, the rustle of a crinoline disappearing up a staircase. And behind one of those curtains, a woman is sitting alone in her dressing room, the maid dismissed, the party over, the mask finally allowed to slip. She's holding a small brown bottle. She's staring at her reflection in the dark window, wondering who she might have been if she'd been allowed to be it. She is not a diagnosis. She is not a piece of property. She is a person, and she is very tired. And she is not, despite what everyone tells her, mad. She's just awake in a world that wants her asleep. So, if you are listening from somewhere in the 21st century, maybe in your own quiet room, maybe with your own list of things you are supposed to feel and not supposed to say, take a moment to thank her. She didn't have your options, but she did have your voice, buried somewhere under the whalebone and the laudanum. And, eventually against all odds, she used it. If you enjoyed drifting off to this story of hidden history, take a second right now to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It's the simplest way to tell the algorithm you want more nights like this, more stories pulled from the quiet corners of the past. And drop a comment below. Tell me where you are listening from, what time it is for you, and if you've ever felt like a character in a gilded cage, even for a moment. I read them all, and they remind me why these stories matter. Now, dim the lights, settle into your blankets, and let the last image be not the prison, but the woman who found the key. Sleep well,